Okay.
So why don't I go ahead and call the meeting to order at 1:01. And first item is citizen comments. Do we have any citizens who wish to make any comments? I don't see anybody but staff in here. So we'll pass over that, and we'll approve the minutes of the April 24th, 2023 meeting. Motion by Spiro, second by O'Reilly. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Okay, the purpose of this meeting, and I think this is, first of all, I got to thank Nick for putting together basically a roadmap for where we would have to go to reach, to implement anything here. And basically, he's given us some options, and what I think we're going to do today is talk about those options and which ones we might want to present to the Common Council. I hopefully, if we can come to some agreements, I think we can wrap up this ad hoc committee today. I think we can. I don't think there's a great deal of dissent on these things at all. But I'm going to ask Nick to basically go over and try and explain to you what the MU dividend policy. There are two different ones. There's the MU dividend policy, and then there's the city dividend policy. And Nick, why don't you go ahead with the MU dividend policy? Since you wrote the other one, I might ask you to do that too. I don't know.
Can I just ask a question? In the email, is it under the email where you say policy? It's those two that we're looking at, right?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
I got one here if you want to do.
Well, I got it.
Okay, you got it? All right.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing any more emails than that.
Okay. Okay, Nick, it's all yours.
Sure. So I think, based on the last meeting and the recommendations from the city attorney is trying to frame this as being, the part that the utility commission and the utility should play, and then the part that the city should play as it relates to transfer of funds. The utility historically has had a policy that identified the pilot and then the dividend that's been around for nearly, I think, 11 years now. And based on last meeting, based on our commission meeting back in May, let's see, what month we're in now, May, June, must have been April. What we did was we put together a revised policy for our commission, the utility commission to look at, and that was included in the packet, or in the extra pages as an attachment. And basically what that policy identified was the mechanism how a dividend would be provided to the city on an annual basis. That policy basically takes the outcomes of this body's discussions is looking at the net ATC investment and then looking at 20% of the interest and dividend income on an annual basis. And that timeline would be in March every year. Right now that's when the dividend is considered. So in March each year, we would look at the previous year, and from that would run through the calculation to arrive at some dollar amounts. They would go to the commission for their consideration. And then those dollars, with approval, would be transferred then to the city to use for their, I guess, we framed it in this way. Obviously, it's all up to the commission and the council on how you would apply the dollars. But for instance, like in this March, if this policy would have been in place, they would approve the amount, and you would use that amount in your general fund budget for next year. So this fall, when you're going through the planning process, you know the dollars that you're going to receive from the utility. It's not a guess, if you will. And the thought process behind that, and you can see in the memo that I wrote up, there's volatility here in how much the money, how the dollars could be every year, and that being forward look or having the dollars and then looking for the next year's budget, hopefully would ease any oversight issues or concerns, I guess, in trying to make a budget based on a forecast and then not knowing for sure if that forecast will come true or not. So the commission did review the policy. They did find it, they did approve the policy as it was written, contingent on the Common Council moving forward with your steps, and I think that was based on how we discussed it last time. They're supportive of this, helping the city. I think as Ms. Spiros has asked about, trying to get us all healthier. This falls in line with that. Geez, I can go on forever, but it's just to allow you guys to bring up ideas and comments and questions.
Steve?
Thanks, Ed. I have two questions. So first of all, Nick, that chart that you have at the bottom of the first page for 2018 through 2022, what you're showing there, I just want to make sure I understand, is what the city would have received if this policy had been in place, correct?
Correct. And I would note that, you have the investment, the interest income. So let's look at that just for specifics.
Okay.
The net ATC investment for 18 and 19 and 22 are relatively consistent, whereas you can see 20 and 21 are considerably different. I would attribute those to COVID. I would say that had an impact on how ATC managed their funds. So I would use the other 3 years as maybe more indicative of where, in a general sense, where it would be. And then if you look at the interest and dividend income, you can again see how the numbers changed, and that's again indicative of the interest environment. In 18 and 19, before the pandemic, interest rates were starting to come up. We were seeing returns on investments. Then COVID happened, and the interest rates dropped out in 20 and 21, and now have recovered in 22. So that's, again, indicative of the interest rates in the markets on the investments. So.
Okay. The other thing, and I know you and I have talked about this briefly, but I kind of want it out there so we all understand it. When you talk about net ATC investment, that's the total investment less what you oftentimes call capital call, right?
Right.
And let's just make sure we all understand what that means again. I know you don't control that. That's not
Correct.
something you control,
Yeah,
but what does that tie into?
Yeah, I mean, ATC is part of their structure, is providing us cash distributions, which are we consider revenue, if you will, and then capital calls, which are calls to help and support their investment in transmission system upgrades. And to your point, Steve, the Marshfield Utilities has no control over how much those dollars are. They basically send us a request every quarter, says here's what it is, and we have to submit it. We don't really have much of a choice in the process. In order to maintain our ownership share, our return, everything, we need to just follow in line with that.
Could a lower capital call have been the difference in 20 and 21, or was that just
Correct. Yeah.
because of what you're saying?
COVID, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think
All right.
there were some documents, that, not in this packet, but previously, that I provided with tables and spreadsheets that showed by quarter for a number of years what those values were.
Thank you.
There's something else about that ATC investment, and they pay both in cash. Geez, okay, you too. They pay both in cash, and they can also do that in increase in shares, or something like the increase in shares in that, or and so we don't have any choice as to what they do there. They say 100,000 in cash and 1.5 shares extra in the system. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah. Again, we don't have any control over it. They have so when they're doing their cash distribution calculation, there's it's called undistributed earnings, I believe. And again, that is I want to say it's roughly 20%. Don't quote me on that number, but that 20% gets reinvested to maintain our market share in the company. So it shows up on our income and other things, but it's not hard cash. It's reinvestment. It's in. If you go to the balance sheet that we provide you on a monthly basis, it shows there it's ATC investment, which is that cash distribution is part of that investment number. Or the undistributed earnings is part of that, along with the capital calls.
And just to make sure one more time, what you do currently, prior to changing, if this is what happens, is the city gets a portion of the ATC dividend determined, how so? I think I know what you're going to say, because we've heard it before. I just want to hear you say it one more time.
Yeah, the previous dividend policy before this revision outlined how that calculation was completed. And that was driven by an internal calculation, just as the policy that I have here is being driven by this body and by the commission. So it's based on policy, how the calculation is done, but the inputs to those calculations, the cash distributions, the capital calls are all obviously controlled externally by ATC.
Because one of the questions that I think people here would want to know is, I mean, it's volatile, the whole thing about what the amount comes from ATC and how it all plays out, but will we actually turn out better with this policy? It looks in these years it definitely would. That isn't necessarily always going to be the case, though, is it?
Correct. And I think that the original policy, when it was drafted, was a best estimate at the time. And I think, going through this process, even if we weren't, if the considerations that we're making here with this policy to support the city, if we weren't doing that, I think that I would recommend to the commission, if we were maintaining the economic development support, I would recommend that we relook at how that calculation was done to make sure that, at the end of the day, that the utility is not incurring an additional expense. I would want to make sure that they're whole, just as we've done now with the new policy.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? The one thing, when I look, okay, I understand the ATC investment. That's simple. I mean, that's not a big problem. Where did you get, okay, you used the number of 20%, but my question is 20% of what, and where do I find that on your balance sheet?
Well, the 20% number is something that came out of this committee, so that's where that number came
Well,
from.
that's 25. But.
Actually, I think you gave me a range, so I just
Yeah,
took a number.
yeah, my mistake.
And then as far as where that number comes from, so, if you want to do checks and balances, the best way, if you look at the income statement for the electric, water, and communications utility, you will see a line that says other revenue. Unfortunately, for water and electric, that other revenue includes other numbers. But for the communication utility, that is the interest earnings. So in December, if you look at the other revenue for communication utility, that'll give you that number. As far as checks and balances, the PSC annual report that we submit by May every year has there's an account 419, and that itemizes ATC investment along with the other interest that we're earning, and it's all there. And you could go back and track, if you correlated the ATC numbers along with the interest earnings in that report annually, you would be able to come up with the numbers that I've shown here. So it's all, again, it's on a PSC annual report. It's part of the our audit. I mean, it's all.
This is the income statement for the electric utility?
Yeah, and there's one for water and communication that comes.
Okay, so where does this appear?
There's other revenue at the bottom.
Other
sorry.
income?
Income, other income?
Other revenue, I thought it was.
Other income and expense?
It says, other income and expense, the first line, other revenue. Unfortunately, for electric and water, that number includes other dollars because we have bond proceeds, interest, and other things that fall into that calculation. But for the communication utility, that number is only at this time interest earnings. So that's where the communication utility comes from. The electric and water, you have to go to the PSC annual report. It's probably the easiest.
And you're
one.
using the annual actual date?
Yep.
So
As
the
of December.
366, 847, is that?
Oh, I've got March pulled up, sorry.
Which is that?
Are you looking at December, Ed?
March 31, 2023.
Oh, that's correct.
This was from your report to your board.
Yeah, the same one I provided the council as well, correct?
Yep.
No. You're looking at what number? 366. That's the total. That's the net income. Above that, the 165, 149. That number includes interest earnings and includes other items for electric and water. Unfortunately, it's not. There's other pieces to that. It's the PSC report. If you had that, if you go to the website, you can see where it's submitted. We can show you how that's done, so you could do a check and balance to confirm the numbers that we've come up to if you need to.
Is all interest revenue recorded there? There isn't, if you have restricted funds, is that interest revenue recorded?
It's all 419 all goes through that account.
So it's all sources.
That's where you came up with the what, what was it? For this year, it was 1,600, 16,000?
The 16,000 is the, that would, so that, the 16,000, let me back up. In March, the commission authorized $286,743 for the economic development. That's the transfer that's been going on historically. If the policy that the commission has approved was adopted completely, there would be another $16,000 that would be added to that based on the ATC net calculation. And then there would be another $98,000 that would come from interest earnings at 20%, for a total of an additional $114,401 this year, above what was originally provided. So the total this year would have been just over $400,000.
Okay.
This year, based on last year's numbers.
The receipt in 2023.
Correct.
I guess I understand the process you're using, and it's simplified a little bit from what we thought it would be. But again, I still don't feel like I know what we're actually doing here, where we're going after. Let's put it this way: what specific line item are we looking at and going after? Is it always that? You say the 419 line in your report, account number 419. But that would be, and I guess I'm still confused. Is that your annual, or, well, it shows up in annual and monthly, right? But then I see other income and expense is 165,149.
Yeah, that's just the total, that's the total of the two lines above it. That's the net of the other revenue and the other expenses, comes up with the total of those two numbers.
Okay.
I mean, as Jennifer knows, I mean, there's, from an accounting
Steve,
perspective.
have you looked over this?
What he said?
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, the point we're talking about right now with respect to what all interest is covered, I'm still not sure I'm clear, because I don't know what 419 even means, so I was going to ask that in a minute. It seems like Jennifer might know, though.
Oh, well, I mean, you can explain it better. It's your
Interest income.
But I mean, broadly speaking, on what investments? On all investments.
So
Okay.
LTIP, anything that
Okay.
will
Yeah.
concede
Then I've got it.
is investment.
Even I can
I know
understand that.
that's the definition. If you look in the handbook, that's the definition of the 419 account.
Right.
Yeah,
So
but that's sort of
it
like,
goes to them.
yeah, so how do I know what goes in there? Besides, how do I know what you've classified to put in there?
Because we have to submit everything to the PSC on an annual basis for review, and we go through an audit process just like the city does. And if I was to fraudulently put interest earnings in another account, they would make us do a journal entry to correct it back to 419. Like, the utility doesn't have discretion. I guess that's what you're getting at. We don't. It's interest earnings have to go into account 419.
So if we were to look at the Treasury report that gets submitted monthly, it would be, we pull numbers that they provide, and they show up on the Treasury report where the investments are held.
Okay, so you feel comfortable with that being?
I would think.
Being the baseline for all
Yeah.
the calculations, and that's what I'm concerned about. Is the process something that we can verify and check?
I
Yeah.
believe we could. I mean, that they're listed on that report that that they supply. This comes, when is your PSC report due?
May 1st.
May 1st. So same as our Form C timing.
And this is an important point, because I want us to be able to all walk away from whatever understanding we have on the same page. And if you understand whether it's, looking at what they get from ATC minus the capital call, here's the net, here's the 419 interest revenue, here's 20% of it. If that all comes together for you so that we all understand we're talking about the same number when we're done, that's an important piece. You can argue about what the number is, but that's an important piece.
Right. Well, we can argue about the multiplier.
Well, right, you said 25%, right, but I'm saying my only thing, but one thing is that we walk away and we all have the same understanding, so we don't turn around a year later and say, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. How you computed this? We can all be able to say, we got it, Jennifer's got it, Nick's got it, Patty's got it, I've got it, you've got it. What comes from that is understandable, and it's what we expected in terms of the calculation.
I don't have a problem with that. I've tried poking at this thing from different angles to see if it bleeds, and it hasn't so far, so I feel relatively comfortable. Unless an attorney throws something at me and says, boy, are you stupid. And I don't know. You have no comment on that? Or
No, not in terms of the economics. I think they're there, and again, I would look, I see the account reference. That seems to me to be simple, that on a line item on the budget, that's what you're looking at. You're nodding. That's how I'm assuming it's that straightforward. I haven't looked at the raw data that you had for the month of March, but I don't think I need to. If we're hearing that that's something that we can verify, meaning that you can go to a number and you can see this is what that number is, and then you can use your multiplier so you can see that you're getting what you were expecting, that's about as straightforward as I think you can get. Now, whether that's what you want or there's other negotiations, that's but in terms of just that raw thing, you're asking, does an attorney look at you and say you're stupid? No, this all makes sense. So, making sense in what you want, that may be different.
Jennifer seems satisfied with it.
Yeah.
Steve, sort of.
Like I said, you can talk about 20% versus 25% versus something else, but I was concerned that this would be something confusing. We wouldn't all walk away with the same understanding. I don't feel that way now.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just point out that if, obviously we have a couple steps in front of us, but the Common Council approved a budget for this year, last year. And there are dollars in that budget for economic development which come from the transfer that happened in March. So that $286,743 was, I guess, planned for this year's budget of the city. So it's already been spoken to in some regards. Based on the calculation, there's another $114,000, and I think the commission provided a consensus that if we get through all the approvals, then there would be an additional $114,000, which represents, I think, over 1% of your general fund for next year's, your fall into next year's budget cycle. And then obviously next March, then it would be the whole amount.
Right?
Thank you.
Correct. That's
Okay,
my
any
understanding
other-
as well.
Well, I think we've got room, I've got a place on the agenda for us to get into discussion and recommendations. So I just want to make sure we'll go over the things that Nick provided us with, the policy drafts that he provided us with, and then we'll get to the other portion of it and getting down to the details. The other one has to do with, that's the companion resolution that would have to be passed by the city council to conform with the utilities policy that we just went over. And that thing is, let's see if I got it right here. Yes, I do. This is rather interesting because there are a couple of decisions for us to make. One, the NEK, which stands for Nick Cum, so it took me about 5 minutes to figure that out, Nick, thank you. But anyway, the first, version 1 is, it's basically status quo. With and the policy is the transfer of funds from the utility derived below the line income of annual net investments in American Transmission Corporation, hereinafter ATC, shall be vested in the Economic Development Board. Transfer of funds from the utility dividend from below the line income as a percentage of annual investment interest earnings shall be vested in the Common Council to support the general fund expenses. Okay, so that changes things a little. No, excuse me, that one doesn't change things. That one has the income going to be for the exclusive use of the Economic Development Board, the ATC transfer, and then the other one just adds in whatever percentage it is we're going to get from the investments and everything there.
I'm going to note, just since you're looking at that particular one,
The first one?
it looks like the language may have been, and if you read along at the beginning there, transfer of funds from the utility derived, should we not have from in there? From below the line income as opposed to, yeah, okay.
Got it.
So we know that. All right.
And just to note, I guess, last time you guys discussed this, and it seemed like there was a consensus or a general idea that you may not want to use that one. However, I guess what I would point out is if you go back to the first packet of information I provided you,
Right.
the net ATC investment is that first column. So you are going, there's, right now it's steady and regular. It's going to be somewhat volatile, as you can see based on the numbers I provide. And, pretty much hamstrings your discretion as you consider how to receive those funds.
If I'm not mistaken, though, the item 4 on version 1 is pretty much the same as it on all of them, I think.
Correct, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean-
because the procedure is going to be, basically, this is what is spelled out in statutes, how it all works.
Yeah, and the second version, again, first one and second one are completely the same as what I provided you last time. The second one just basically, it removes that declaration or that direction that it has to go to economic development, really provides the council complete control. And then the third one, what I did in the third one is I took the second one and basically removed the language that specified where the funds were coming from, because I felt that the utility policy is already driving that, and there's not a good reason to try to rehash it, to try to restate
I wondered why
it.
you did that. I wondered why that was dropped out from the third one, but you say it's just because we have no interest in what the policy is, or?
It's not that you don't have interest in it, I just don't, I review legal contracts and things all the time and documents, and I don't like to see things spelled out in two different documents that are trying to mirror each other, because if one body makes a change, then the other body's got to make a change, and providing that they should come together, but I didn't want to see them overlapped, was my impression on it.
Would you feel comfortable just referencing your policy number instead of detailing again what the policy, I mean,
Yeah,
What is that? I
I
didn't.
mean, just reference the utilities policy 1300 rather than trying to detail out.
So the question in my mind, when you look at that, if you look at the third one, is there any reason, if you look at that would be problematic? Is there a reason why you need that additional detail? And the one thing to consider is that right now, as we sit here in 2023, this looks like we know what the sources of transfers may be, but it could result that at some point in the future, additional funds are available from whatever source, rebates, whatever, that the utility could choose by its policy to transfer. And now you would be set with a rigid policy that specifies only two sources and how they got to be used and exactly how that goes, as opposed to having the flexibility to say, we know what it is. What we get from them, we monitor through the finance director, because that's the way the policy reads, and then it's the common council to source it out. Does it matter what their specific derived sources are? I don't know that it does. But again, that's for you folks to talk about. There's nothing wrong with doing it, but I do agree that when you start doing that, you're limiting options and you'd have to look at. So if you came to 1 year where, you know what, we got this rebate and we're prepared to transfer it over to the city, now we'd have to look at this policy and actually try to spell out how does that apply and probably make an exception or change the policy at that point in time.
Nick, go ahead. I have another question, but you go ahead
Well,
next.
2 points to that. We've talked about a streetlight charge. If those funds are remitted back to the city, this policy somewhat, well, that's maybe not our intent right now. Those are funds that would be derived from the utility that are submitted back to the city to help cover those expenses. And the other piece that wasn't identified in the original, even in the original, was the pilot payment. That's the $2 million that you receive. You have discretion over it completely in their statutes, but this policy, if we frame it that way, we may need to, if you want to limit on where the funds are coming from.
There's nothing that currently controls what we do with the pilot payment? There isn't.
No, that's,
So, I mean, that's another thing about this language, is that it's sort of a catch-all, and then it leaves it to the council to do whatever it wants. The only hang-up that you guys potentially have, and that's for starting with this body and then the council, just simply, do you run into an issue with the Economic Development Board saying, wait a minute, we have a guaranteed source, and you just took it away, and now we're going to be at the discretion of the council no matter what. That's the only flaw in this, and I say flaw only in terms of a decision process that you may have people asking questions, but otherwise, from that standpoint, there is a benefit to using this broader scope, because that just clearly says they're giving it to you, it's going into, and remember where we started with all of this, source of general fund revenue. And that does provide you that stream that you originally set down over.
That's correct. And the other thing about that was, where was it? I felt that when the other lines that spoke specifically of below the line were there to please PSC if there was ever any question. It was there to say, look, we took great care to only transfer funds that are below the line, and you can keep your grubby paws off of it.
That's in their policy, though, so
Yeah.
they have the ability to satisfy PSC to whatever extent that needs to be, but it isn't part of it.
And on our side, we don't have to acknowledge that.
We don't need to, there's no reason, we don't have an obligation.
Yeah, the first line in the policy that the commission approves says the goal of the payment is a means for the utility to support the city with below-the-line revenue. So,
And my only point is that we want to show that we've taken care to do that, but,
That's on them.
okay.
To Hap's point a minute ago about the Economic Development Board and how they'll perceive this, I think, Paul, you were the one who made the suggestion last time that one idea would be to look at some sort of a floor, that maybe the policy would say that the council will decide how to use the monies, but in no instance will there be less than $100,000 or some amount transferred over to the Economic Development Board. However, at the end of the day, I mean, think about it, the Economic Development Board is part of the city, and if you guys decide to give them $300,000 or 45 cents, it's ultimately going to be your call anyway. They might not like it, but it's ultimately going to be your call.
One of the complaints we had about the use of the funds, and I got this complaint from people within the utility governance, as well as people from the outside, was we were taking that money and we were using it to pay for salaries. And they didn't like that. They felt that the money that was put in there should be used for lack of a better term, bricks and mortar, for things that were more capital intensive or things like that. And I think when we were doing the CIP the other night, when we came to the Economic Development Board, for CIP, they've got $100,000 a year for every year and for the next 5 years, and no identified projects.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find an Economic Development Board budget. Did you find one?
I have what we have loaded into our system
Yeah.
as a budget, and I can.
Some of those funds there go for, well, there's funds supporting Mackey in there, and we don't want to have to pay for their staff to do that, which we have no control over. If they want to come in and say we didn't do anything this month, too bad. We're stuck with that. But I think the idea was, one of the ideas was to say, look, and Steve touched on it just slightly. He said this would give the council much more control over the finances that go into the EDB, because they would have to, if we did it this way, maybe put a floor in, I don't know, but maybe if we did it this way, then we would have them come to us and say, hey, we got a great idea for a project, we want to do this, 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 and this, and we'll say, oh, good, we got money here that we could allocate to EDB, and whatever was left over would go into the city's coffers and maybe fund, I don't know, pizza party, I don't know. But anyway.
Two considerations that make this palatable. Number one, and I've discussed with multiple members independently that are sitting in this room, and that's simply that we're looking at an advent of new financing considerations for the city, and this leaves you the option to do that at the budgeting consideration, so you can balance all those things that are there, and you're doing it on a broader scale as opposed to earmarking specific dollars for something that you don't know what it is at that given time. What are those dollars competing with? That leaves it to your discretion. But more importantly, where do we start? How did we land here? A statute was brought to our attention that said that this can be done by putting it into the general fund for the municipality.
Right.
And that's literally what your policy now is doing.
And I think, it's, I don't know how to put this nicely. I think we need to prioritize our expenditures as a council, and maybe if we put a floor in it of $100,000, they could still run the facade program. Basically, we just wouldn't be paying the fees for it. Is there anything in there about, we used to fund a bit of the development services salaries, part of the directors, the planners, and the inspectors.
We haven't for a while.
Are we doing anything there?
There is the, I don't know what the title is, but something in Park and Rec.
Yeah, the Wenzel Family Plaza Coordinator. But the days when we took a certain portion of Jason Angel's salary or Josh Miller's salary, those days are gone.
Okay.
Can I say one more thing, too? I don't want to put words in Nick's mouth, but I mean, with respect to the concern they've raised before, maybe it was about salaries, using the dividend to pay salaries, but I think at a broader level, utilities in the 12 years I've been here has expressed some concerns, reasonable questions about how the monies were being used. Are they really furthering economic development? Because that's their goal in transferring these monies to see residential, commercial, and industrial growth. But I think in this policy, they're surrendering that piece and saying, we want to see growth, we want to see development, it helps all of us, but they're not going to contest anymore that it goes into general operations to be used as the city sees fit.
God, I don't know how long ago was it that Maggette was on your board?
I think he left in April of 18.
Okay, so it was before that, I had a Saturday morning meeting with your chairman and Mr. Maggette, and we talked about economic development. Both of them expressed to me their frustration with the city's efforts on economic development. And my counter, as feeble as it was that everywhere I had been, the utilities were leading the economic development charge because they were the ones who would benefit most handsomely from economic development. And I chided the utility about this and I said, well, why don't you guys hire an economic development director of your own, somebody to go, or a business development manager, and have them go out door to door and whatever it is they have to do to build up new construction or whatever. And they said, no, that's the city's job. And that's where a lot of this came from. So I think it is still the city's job, but the EDB was founded in 2011, and I think they got sidetracked badly and turned into a housing group within 2 to 3 years. And so they haven't done much else other than housing in that period of time. So I think maybe if we express our wishes to the EDB that we want to see you guys come up with action programs, and we will fund those action programs if you ask us. Only within the context of what the ATC investment would be. I mean, we don't even have to say that, but the $100,000 they've got in there, I understand, is for facade renovation.
Well, I think it's more like 70 or something right now, but something. I mean, monies have always been in there for those purposes. Yeah.
Right. And I don't know how the rest of the council feels about that, but I know that we've been playing around with this economic development forever.
Well, at some level, the council decides what the priorities are,
Yes.
whether it's economic development, planning, parks, whatever. And as much as I like the EDB and what they do, you have to prioritize where limited dollars are going. So I think that's a reality.
Well, go ahead, Nick.
From the utilities perspective, I guess, the dollars provided were looked at as an investment, right? Anytime you do an investment, you expect a return on investment. I could probably count the number of electric meters and water meters that have been added over those 11 years on one hand. So obviously that's not necessarily been equal, if you will. So that's been the rub, if you will, from the utilities perspective. I think at this point, we've talked about it. I mean, we're willing to support economic development, or at least have conversations about what role we play in it. But in the current times and the current commission guidance is just to be flexible and allow council to do what you need to do, because you have some potentially hard decisions in front of you as you balance budgets and everything else. So
I'm glad. Paul, do you want to, without objection, Paul can speak.
Just one other comment. With the Economic Development Board, you realize there is a fund there that is worth several $100,000. And so if you say we're going to go to discretionary funding version 3, my question begs, what do you do with the funds that are already there for the EDB to use? Are they going to be allowed to use them?
Yeah.
Or not?
My feeling would be that before the fact, so that whatever we were doing
Yeah.
is still a fact. But, and that's true, and that, as I understand it, the source of that money back years and years ago, and this, I mean, we're back in the 1990s. I'm going to shoot you. But anyway, that money was from something that, it might have been from the power plant, the sale of the
It
power
was
plant.
from an old RLF, actually.
Huh?
An old revolving loan fund. I don't know how the revolving loan fund got started, but it was from an old revolving loan fund that we operated until it became apparent that, truthfully, others like Synergy in Central Wisconsin had lower interest rates than we did anyway, so we just kind of wrapped up the fund and had the dollars. They'd been federalized, so to speak. In other words, they've been recycled enough to where we were then given the authority to use them as we saw fit.
I understood it was from I know it was a lump sum that was paid from the utility to the city, and it was $1 million.
That may have started the RLF. I don't know.
There was annual contributions back in the 90s,
Yeah.
similar to how it was done in more recent time through a formula mechanism.
Okay.
You need money to start an RLF. That's part of the program, so
Yeah,
I
and then,
I get it.
well, the RLF, there's still some money in, but the stuff that Paul's talking about, I think, is the economic development capital outlay.
205 fund.
205 fund, yeah.
But that's not, yeah.
205, yeah,
That's kind of all-encompassing.
right. And I get distracted, damn. But I know they spent a great portion of it on the Daniels subdivision, and we theoretically are going to get something back out of that.
Well, they've recouped half of it, actually, probably a little more than half of it.
Yeah, but isn't there that rakeback clause then in there that says that if they don't build by June 1st, then they can
Right.
have all except $5,000 back?
Right, and you're going to be seeing this soon. The people who have not actually built after buying lots, are they going to sell them back to the city, which is contemplated in the agreement, obviously, or are they going to ask for an extension? Can I have till December 31st or whatever to build the house that I want to build? But you are going to see that. That's why we've talked at the EDB meetings about the fact that you see a fund balance of this much,
But it's not usable.
Think about it being this much, because we might have to refund some of those monies if people say, yeah, I'm not building anymore.
If I calculated it right, it's close to 400,000.
Yeah, it's between 300 and 400, I think, somewhere in there.
Yeah,
It'd be
so
about
that's,
half of what's in the fund.
Yeah, close to that.
what was that?
It'd be about half of what's in the fund.
Yeah.
But even so, the fund would still be several $100,000, so there are monies there.
I know, and I know Mike Braham's explanation to the council of what that money was for says, well, if we get a big company like Saturn, remember Saturn, the Saturn debacle, where they were going to place a Saturn plant, every city in the United States bid on it and said, we'll give you $1 million if you come here. You know, and that would, so developers' incentives were a big deal then. They are now, too. So I don't know if we can use some of this for it or not, but.
You know, truthfully, we're going to have this joint meeting real soon here between the EDB and the council on housing. I think the EDB and the council have to be working more hand in hand, because they're really not fully independent, in my opinion. The EDB needs council support. They need to know what council's priorities are so they can be out there doing council's bidding. That was the intent 10 years ago. If they're not doing
Yeah, it
council's
was.
bidding, then we're not in a good place anyway.
Right. So the question before us, though, is do we want to put all the money into the general fund, or do we want to earmark, or do we want to give a floor to EDB, or do we want to keep it as it is? Those are the three choices we have to make, and now is as good a time as any to make that choice.
I mean, are you going to go around and ask? I think it should just all go to the city's general fund, and then the EDB comes to us with, you know, I think it just allows us to closer monitor, too, what's happening with the EDB. You know, if they have to come and they have to say, look, we're thinking about doing this, or we're going after this, or this is something that we need money for, then we know about it. And
I would definitely agree with that. I think, well, the other part is, our financial situation is not well, so you may run into years like this where we have the capability to use that money that we needed at a city level when if you're in that much financial trouble, you're probably not doing a whole lot of economic development at that time anyhow.
Well, Steve said it. He said it well, and that is, we have priorities, and the first one is survive.
Yes.
Yeah, there may be a point where the best economic development you could do is to use money to fix streets
Yeah.
so people can drive here. I mean, it could be anything at that point to make this a desirable place to live.
So we are at that point in the agenda where we want to make recommendations to the council. Go ahead.
May I add, and it's something we put in the dividend policy that the commission adopted, was that on an annual basis, you're annual basis revisiting this. And I think this is a good conversation. You talked about joint meetings. I'm hopeful that we'll get the commission and the council together, and this will be one of the topic items that should be talked about and fleshed out a little bit.
Good point.
Yeah, at
Really good
least
point.
annually, I think, or biannually, for sure.
Yep.
It becomes part of the budget planning process that we institute at this time, where we look at, okay, the general fund has available money to transfer to other funds, and we set up some guidelines that we review annually at, in a work session setting before we even begin to prepare the budget as
Amen.
departments.
Amen, I agree.
Okay. So
For
are
the
we?
reason it serves as an informative, to the council and to your department heads, they all are going to have a better picture, as they start that budget process, because I think a big portion of that is missing. And then we have a very inexperienced council that don't understand anything.
Well, we're
A lot of,
broad.
We're
and so
beginning that process,
right,
right.
so
Yeah.
that's going to be helpful to bring that in at the beginning, so.
True.
Okay. So do we want to, I don't know what the procedure on this would be. Ask Jessica, I'm sorry. Do we need a motion to pass something on to the common council?
I would recommend that.
Yeah.
Okay. So which one of the, you want to choose what, the option 3 or the option 3 is the one that has the, I like to call that the honey youngman clause. It's a one-liner.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, it says, transfer of funds from the utility shall be vested in the common council to support city operations. Okay. Do you want to recommend that one to the council?
That's the one I like the best.
Motion by Spiros. Second by O'Reilly. Discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? So carried. Okay, now, the one thing, we don't have to take any action concerning the utilities, except we may want to talk about the percentage rate. Is everybody comfortable with the 20%, or do you want to try to do more?
Is there going to be, I know we talked early on about how much they needed to keep in for operating costs and rainy day fund, basically. So the money that's invested or your cash assets, is any of that getting affected by this, or is it simply going to be percentages going forward? Because I seem to have missed that part of it. I know we had talked originally about transferring some of the, I don't know how you did, the stock
Some of the
options, or just like a cash
the option,
transfer type thing.
either the investment itself or the interest from it. I think what we're talking about is the interest from it.
Yes, I understand that.
We're not talking about taking any of the actual savings or
So that part
investment.
of it is off the table at this point, is what we're kind of leaning toward.
We never brought it up, and I don't see,
Okay.
I don't see anything.
Yeah, I get it. I was just trying to clarify, because it was a question I had for a while here. I was trying to remember if anything had happened with that.
So, I don't know.
I guess due to the financial nature, I mean, they're very strong financially at this point, from what I can perceive on everything. And
Last I saw in cash and investments was 33 million, 33.1, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, you enjoy counting it all the time, come on.
I'll file those down.
Bottom drawer of his desk.
We don't have to rehash all that. You'd rather us be having this conversation with the utility being in that situation than me coming to you and saying, hey, we're in a bad spot, we need help.
And I also don't want to damage your
Yeah,
financial situation. I
No.
think that's why I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. And,
We're not asking to surrender any of the investment documents or the investment tools like what are they, the cash accounts, the
CDs.
CDs, yeah.
Yeah, and you may remember, we outlined, we have a lot of capital projects that are on the horizon. So
Yeah.
those are just, from this process, I think we've identified that, we have policies that are driving, okay, Moody's says we need this, that's driving our policy, and we didn't get to the level of saying, all right, these dollars are for X, Y, and Z. We've kept it kind of general, but there's high-level markers.
Yep.
I think from this process, we've identified that once we get a little bit further down the road, we're going to go back and say, okay, let's try to earmark those so that there's better visibility, better understanding where those dollars will flow in the future to support.
I understand what you're saying, but I also know that there are provisions in your accounting manual that say that if you've identified a use for the surplus funds, there are accounts that you put them, you got to name that account after what it is you're going to spend it for and go from there. And you don't do that. It's basically cash and investments. That's what it basically is. We don't know what you're planning on doing with the money. And that's what the frustrating part is. It makes it look like hoarders, and that's what it makes it look like.
Well, that's why the policy that the commission had identified, I think there was 8 or 10 bullets that said for X, Y, and Z at a high level, capital projects being one of them. From this process and your comments that you just made, the plan is after we get a little further down the road, we will go back through and say, okay, we're going to put $4 million for lead services and X dollars for this, so that we all understand where those dollars are going to flow to in the future.
Well, how long have you had them there before and you haven't done it yet?
Well, the process was working just fine until this conversation started.
No one asked to have it done.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, we spent $1.2 million last year on lead service replacements. We were able to use our cash position to support that,
yeah. And that is and I don't know, I haven't seen anything on it. Of course, it could go back years. Is that a commission policy to stay in, or to self-fund projects like lead replacement and that sort of thing? I mean, is it easier to do that? Is it more efficient is it beneficial for the citizens of Marshfield that you cash fund it as opposed to do the short-term borrowing for it that is so readily available?
I think that yes and yes. It really depends on the financial situation of a number of factors, just like we did with the building. We brought Ellers in and said, here's what we're looking at doing. Here's some of our additional projects in the future. What would you recommend is, should we finance? Should we cash fund it? I've been thinking about the city situation, and I understand that every year you do annual borrowings of about $4 million, and I get that process. Thinking about it, when the interest rates were so low, was there thoughts about, why don't we do 2 years? Because we can use the funds over 2 years. And we could have capitalized on that low interest rate, and you could structure the debt so you're only paying maybe interest on the first year or two to help get all the, make sure it's levelized spending. Things like that, I hope that we're looking at. Right now, obviously, interest rates are very high, so is there ways to play the shell game so we're saving money long term? That's what we're doing at the utility. That's what, every time we look at a large project, we're trying to understand, okay.
But we couldn't understand, you remember we asked that question when you decided to go with the building. And
Right.
Why are you bonding for this when you've got the cash to pay for it twice?
Right. $1.5 million or 1.5% interest rates. The recommendations from Ellers was, you got these other projects on the horizon, borrow at a low number, low interest rate, and then spend dollars when the interest rates are much higher.
And then how do you pass that savings or the realized savings onto the ratepayers and the taxpayers of Marshfield?
Well, now we're going to be transferring more money to you, to the city, I
Now.
should say. And we're also, it comes down to the expense related to the debt, right? It comes down, if you have lower interest rates versus cash financing, you don't have interest, you don't have interest payments. So it's those pieces.
Do you build your long-term project list into a financial plan with Ellers, so in the same manner that the city does, or do you look at it project by project?
We've given them, the last time when we did, so lead services we were looking at, I think last fall, we provided them not only the lead services, but anything that we could see in the 5-year planning horizon from a capital perspective, outside of norm.
So, and at that time, they would have given some sort of recommendation, borrow versus self-fund? Okay.
And that does all go back to the commission, so.
Right.
We approve major capital items like that. It isn't just Nick says, let's do it.
Yeah.
It comes back through us.
So in conjunction with Ellers and your 5-year plan, is that something that is shared with the city through any means? I mean, maybe that's what I know Mr. Wagner is looking for, is like, here's our 5-year plan that Ellers has,
Yeah.
kind of built in our modes of financing these projects.
Yeah, I mean, it's, yes, I guess, we'll share whatever you want to see. I think that what you're going to find is that the last one we did, when we do an analysis, it's not just a 5-year plan, it's a 5-year plan of, all right, we're going to, like, for instance, the building, I think we had like 4 or 8 different iterations of how we wanted to structure things. And each one is just spreadsheets, multiple spreadsheets showing the same thing you have as far as the debt forecast, the rate of return calculation, the expenses going on every year, when rate cases should be planned for, things of that. So it ends up being like, I think that was well over 100, maybe
It was a
200.
book.
Yeah, it was quite a few pages of data. So, I mean, if you want to have it, more.
No, I'm not, I mean, I'm just looking at like a summary, like here's our, in my head, it's here's our 5-year plan, here's the amount, our expenditures might be $100 million over the next 5 years, we're going to borrow 50, we're going to self-fund 50, and this is where it comes from. Just at that very highest level.
That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah,
And
it's only, I mean, when we do it, it's incorporating the things in the future, but the decision is only being made on that one large investment, that one project, because the circumstances obviously change.
Sure.
Okay, let me get back on track. So the last thing we've got here is the idea about the percentage of the percentages, right? Do you want to send it to the council as it is?
I would suggest at least 25. My perspective on it. I mean, if we're not touching really assets at all, the reason being is we have an immediate need that is concerning. It's some money and it's appreciated, but somehow we have to stop the bleeding that's going on right now. So that's the only reason that I push it that direction, but I don't know.
I would need to take it back to the commission for consideration, because that's obviously a change from what they approved. And dollars and cents, you're talking less than $5,000.
The what? I'm sorry.
There's $98,000 is interest. If you change that from 20 to 25, it obviously goes up by about 5,000. So it's not. It helps. It helps, but it's not gonna.
Seeing as we're going to review this every year,
Yeah.
maybe we should talk about it next year. And if the minutes will reflect that, so we have a record of it.
Yeah.
Okay, you point to the video camera. Thank you. You're a brave girl. Very good.
I am, but I'm struggling. Can you take a look at your table, Nick? So at the bottom of your table, it says 20% interest in dividend income, and
Legislation on.
Oh,
I'm just looking at the number, and I'm just trying to understand this. Because you've got 80, like for example, for 2018, you've got 87,000.
I'm sorry, it would be about $20,000.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear you say.
does that make a 20,000 difference?
Yes.
That's what I thought he was going to say.
Sorry, I was
Huh?
doing quick math and something.
It's okay.
Sorry.
I don't think you're right. 98,000 equals 20% of our total.
Right.
Right.
So
So another
4,900 is 10%.
All I'm saying is if this number right here, this was $87,000, if that represents 20%, 25% is going to be another 25% over this. So that's not, I'm not doing it right? If $87,000 is 20%,
If you had 100,000 here and 20%, so that would mean there was a total of 500,000. 25% would be 120, okay,
What's five?
you got it.
okay.
What's five?
You got it.
About 19,000.
Yeah, right, all right.
Yeah,
Yeah, about 19,000.
yeah.
Because I just rounded.
St. Cloud State University comes through for me.
Rounded to 100.
I don't know why I said that.
So, so that's the difference between 20 and 25% is 20 grand.
Yeah, roughly. At least in that 1 year. I mean, it could,
Sounds better.
it could be, it could be less, it could be more, but
So you want to recommend it to the council at 25?
And then you need to take that back then, I guess, to the utility. And then he'll have to take that back to the utility because everything he worked like was with 20%.
And just let us know, and
Tell
we'll,
them it's just 5,000.
everything else remains the same.
can I point this out? There was a motion made earlier which seemed to be the 20%, so I guess I'm going to need like a
vote on
amending of that, amending of that, right?
Amended motion.
Motion by O'Reilly to amend,
To amend.
second by Spiros. Discussion.
Okay.
All those in favor, it's 25%.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
All right.
All right.
And then I have to have one final
I don't know if we're
motion,
going to
really.
need to bring this committee back together again. We
One more
didn't,
time, I think.
Thanks.
you think one more time?
He's going to take this now to,
Well, you can bring it to the council.
well, that's true.
Are you getting close to adjourning here?
Yeah.
Okay, my only question is, and I realize it's not even called out on the agenda as I look at half, but under consideration for the council possible action, one of the two charges of this group was the commission makeup and the number of members and so forth.
Yeah.
Are we letting that one go into the sunset, or are we having another meeting, or what are we doing?
Basically,
I'm not pushing for anything, I'm just bringing it up.
I know. We could, it seems to me, and back me up on this if you remember, that we couldn't come to it, we didn't come to any conclusion here.
No, there really were three ideas out there. One is stay the way it is.
Yeah.
Two is 5 members with 1 council member. The other was 7 members with 2 council members, and that would be 7-year terms, which is
Right. Which is-
debated at length whether
Which
that was a
freaked
good thing.
everybody out, right.
But we never really came to a consensus as to
No,
where
we
we're going.
didn't.
So I'm just
What's
trying
the
to tie
current
it.
makeup?
5 members, no council members, 5 members.
2 council reps to the meetings.
Right, they're
Non-voters.
correct, non-voting or whatever you want to call them. And again, I'm not pushing for anything, I'm just bringing it up.
And their
because
current.
If you look back to our
are they
charge.
served for 5 years right now?
Correct. And the thought is 5 years, 5 members, 5 years, 7 members, 7-year terms.
Right.
Why do we have to change the terms, the length of this?
That's
It's
by
dictated
statute, isn't it?
By statute.
Oh, okay.
But you could do a 5 members with 1 member being a council person and just make sure that that cycle always has a council person. I don't know how it would work in terms of the logistics of what the language would be in the, in the code. But like I said, it was one of the 2 charges of this commission to look at the transfer from utilities, and the other was to look at the makeup. I just want to make sure that if you bring something to the council, you've decided this is what we want to present in total.
I think what we said was don't change at the moment. I think that's what it was, because we couldn't make up our mind what to do with that 7-year term, or how you would word a 5-member commission with one being a council person. That was the hardest one. Even wording that would be just really difficult.
Well, you have the whole election cycle that plays into that. So I don't know how that looks like.
Right.
So, Mike is the council rep, and then he doesn't run again. There'd have to be some language that would filter that out somehow.
But we deal with that now also.
Yeah, I mean, we have that
People
language.
retire or,
Or lose elections, yeah.
I don't know, I would like to see it changed. I would like to see representation on the council from in there. I think it's a very good path for the communication and understanding of what's happening there.
I think one of the things we can do is we can bring a recommendation before the council and have them debate it. So which one do you want to recommend? I'm sort of agnostic on this. I'm just sort of
I
like,
would prefer the 5 and 1. I think the 7 years is daunting. I mean, I don't know that any, you know,
But
it's
is
just
it
a lot.
really going to be 7 years? I mean, because
Well-
even at 5 years, if you have a council member that doesn't, I mean, it happens when commissioners retire or walk away from it as well.
Well, here's the thing though, Mike, what if you have what if you have somebody on that utility commission, a commissioner that you don't like, that isn't doing a good job? I mean, you're stuck with them for 7 years.
Oh.
I mean, you have to think of it that way.
Yeah.
There are people who don't perform well when they're put onto different commissions. They you know, they stop showing up for meetings or what have you, or they just, you know, there's a lot of reasons, and then you have nothing you can do about that for 7 years after they've been on. You know, they attend one meeting, they miss 3. They attend one, they miss 3. That's not somebody you want to have that on there for 7 years dealing with that. It's a long time. I mean, I don't know why we can't just do the 5 members. One member of the council that's appointed year. The council member will be changing. You know, could change yearly based upon the appointment of the mayor. I mean, that's what we do for anything else, right?
Yeah. I just know this, off and on, the council in the 12 years I've been here has been asking for some level of representation. And
Right. So I think
That's why I thought I'd better throw it in before we walk away today.
I just think,
without extending the length of the, you know,
Without extending the length of the term.
right. And knowing that council person would be up for reappointment every year. I mean, that would be just like every other.
Can you legally do that, though, with the statute?
Well, I don't know.
I think you would have to vote as a council for your council representative, just like you vote for your commissioners right now.
Annually?
Oh, okay, so it'd be a vote, not an
So when they're
appointment.
going to vote annually, no matter what the term is.
Well, you vote currently for your commissioners, your public representatives in October. Those terms start October 1st. You vote your last council meeting
Right.
in September. So we'll be looking at unexpired terms for your alderperson a lot more frequently than you do your current representatives. So you just be filling a vacancy with an unexpired term.
So that 5th person really wouldn't even have a specific term. They'd be on because they're on the council, and it might.
No, they would still be a 5-year term. So presumably, let's just say Mike, as example, is elected as your utility commissioner this year. He essentially stays on for 5 years or until the end of his council term, at which point that would be an unexpired term, which we're now filling a
Okay.
vacancy
Okay.
by election.
Okay,
I'm good
that
with
makes
that.
more sense.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine. Okay, seeing as you've written all this down, Steve.
Yeah. I think so.
Go ahead.
So right now, historically, there's been 2 liaisons, which I understand they don't have voting, but they are have the ability to come to every meeting, participate, provide input. And the council as a whole is saying that the utility is not communicating. Now you have these 2 people that don't have voting rights. How are you going to ensure that the communication, the information is being shared when it's not being done now, even when you're there at the meeting?
Well, that's still going to be incumbent on whoever the representative is, but now they'll be in closed session, which they haven't been before.
Correct, but I mean, there's a number of things in open session that
Oh, I know.
could have easily been communicated that maybe you would have wanted to know and weren't being done, and
I think-
now that you have voting rights, what's going to prompt that to now be
I
communicated?
can tell you for a fact that when I served there, and there were 2 other guys that during my tenure there that served as reps to that. It was like, it doesn't make any difference at all whether we report to the city council or not, because the utility's going to do what it wants to do anyway, and we didn't have any input to it. I mean, you said we were allowed to speak and give input. Not in some of those early days, we weren't.
I can't speak to the early days, I can only speak for the last 5
No,
minutes.
and you make a point.
It's not your fault, Nick. I mean, I'm not blaming you. I mean,
You make
if
a good-
anything, I think you've been a little more open. As a matter of fact, you've been tremendously more open to things than were in the past.
Yeah, you make a good point. Right now, we have members of the council who serve as a liaison to the Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Committee, the Historic Preservation Commission, and oftentimes, I think, they don't come back and report to the body what's going on. We hear it some other way. So you make a good point. It's still going to be incumbent upon whoever it is, the one person who's a voting member or the 2 people who attend now that aren't voting members, to share that information. That doesn't change. I get that part.
Another thing I just want to bring up is that, I was just at an annual conference, and I know I'm on the executive team and stuff, and I was talking to a number of elected individuals like yourselves that are serving on commissions, and asked them, well, how does it work? What's the pros and cons? And while you get the representation, the tricky side or the challenging side is that now you're having to make decisions on a matter about the utility that may conflict with the decisions that you need to make here as a council member. So that puts you in a challenging spot. You may have to,
What kind of confliction are you talking? I mean, I guess I'm just as a for instance.
One member was talking about how they handle wage increases. You have the challenges here, and the utility is dealing with a different marketplace, dealing with different, we compete against the investor-owned utilities for linemen.
Sure.
So
I just don't see the conflict.
well, if you're giving 0% here and you have to give a number down at the utility different, can you rectify that? You
Well, I
can,
mean,
maybe
they are
some
separate
can.
entities.
Does any of the last 3 or 4 minutes of conversation trigger any legal issues that you'd comment on?
No, other than you have the issue, if you do change this, you got to deal with the current commission and those commissioners that are appointed, and I'm trying to think of how you trigger
somebody-
that change. Somebody either gets pulled out, or if there's a way to craft it. I don't know if somebody's term is coming up.
In September, October.
October, yeah.
Well, then that's the easy answer, and then you make your ordinance, because this has got to be done by an ordinance, so that would have been the only thing that was thinking in terms of legality, how do you deal with an incumbent
So that 5-year term
commissioner
will
to
start.
remove them to be able to, but that's perfect then, if that's what you were looking at doing, then you
I'm
can
thinking about
trigger
where-
to make this effective as of the date of that vacancy.
I'm thinking specifically where Nick was going in the last few comments, that type of conflict that might come up for an elected official who also serves on the council and serves on, is there anything inherently conflicting?
Not from a legal point of view, and we have people who are on commissions that may be dealing with that otherwise, but first of all, there's a reason why the statute says this the way that it does. There's a lot of literature out there. You can make yourself informed with that literature, but what they talk about is that there is a real substantial philosophy behind not entangling the commission for a utility with members of the Common Council, mainly from the standpoint that the terms tend to be longer for a reason, that you develop a level of speciality in terms of the issues that are being faced. It's long-term planning in a scope and area that is very specific in terms of financing, in terms of planning, et cetera. So there's sort of like an expertise that has been recognized that develops when you're on a commission for utility. So there's that element of it. You could run into a conflict. When this question came up, the one place that it came is right here, right now, in this conversation is a conflict. Because if you're on the utility commission and you're saying, we want you to take 25% of your income, and you're here in a council member, and you're saying, we don't want to accept 20, now you got this conflict over what's best for the commission as compared to what's best for the utility in terms of its future operation compared to the city. The only problem with that is that ultimately, we are still the same team. This is still the same organization in every respect, but it's accounted for and financed differently, et cetera. So if you want an example of a conflict, it would be this discussion right here, right now. Does it mean that you can't do it? No, I think that it's not a legal conflict that you can't reconcile, but it is one of those things that would be a decision where the interest in the commission that you're working on may be diverse with that of the city in terms of, we'd like dollars right now to deal with the problems that I have to do with the budget, whereas they're looking at, we've got problems trying to plan long-term for eventualities that these people don't really understand. So that's the easy way to define it.
Is there any concern that the utility service area goes beyond the city borders? In other words, that people outside of the city limits are thinking, why is there a city council member on this body when?
Well, for sure, but that's the reason why the statute doesn't prohibit this, though, either. So that, and
I
there's
saw
a
that Boardman outline on that, and that was a...
And there's a restriction, you know, in theory, if you have a utility commission that way, you can't stack it with all council members, but the irony of that is that you could technically do away with the commission and do it through another body that was completely controlled by the
the Board of
council.
Public Works,
But generally speaking, that's the reason why you don't have, that it's structured the way you talked about, so that it's a 5-member, then you can only do it this way, and if it's 7, you can only do it that way, because they are taking into account that you're dealing with a representation that's a broader scope on the utility commission.
You mentioned closed session. While I understand that point. We have to keep in mind, correct me if I'm wrong, only those members of the council that are on the utility commission are privy to the information if they're allowed in a closed session. It's not as though they can disseminate it to the rest of the council members, correct? Since they were not included on the body.
If you're talking about specifically that meeting and that particular information, yes.
So when we think about the incident that came up recently about selling land or something, was that what it was? And there was a question raised, I wasn't at the meeting, but there was a question raised by council as to the fact that that hadn't been known, what was that about? So that person would not be able to divulge anything that they knew from the closed session of the utility commission. Is that what you're saying?
But keep in mind, you guys have experience as council members, why we go into closed session. So if you use that example and you're going to sell land and you're talking about buying land or whatever, you're doing that for specific reasons. The purpose is negotiation. So there is a moment in time where the only issue is when we were going to buy that or what we're going to offer for that. At that moment in time, it's a closed session. As soon as that offer to purchase is signed, that's no longer an element of it. So, I mean, it's contextual. You got to think of it. Right.
I mean, from my perspective looking at it, I don't like change because I think that we're here today in good faith. I mean, we've gone through this process and tried to help. But I think the utility's been operating. I understand your concerns. And if you want to push to make a change, my preference would be for the 7 with 2. Just to give me some additional resources and, as if one person moves on, there's that continuality. But I would also ask if indeed that's the route you'd like to go, can we open up the ordinance that created the commission and change some of the other aspects in there? Specifically the $25,000 limit that the body has and before it comes back to the council, since you would now have representation. Also, there's some reporting requirements in there that are vague and not very defined. And could we clean up some of that language as well? Because I would
I
assume
think that's, you were talking about reporting language from you to us, or from?
Yeah, it's just something that the general manager should file an operation, some type of report on a monthly free. I don't remember the exact language, but it's very vague. Don't know what the history was. Yeah.
Right.
The 25,000 should probably be changed if for no other reason than inflation. But that's not what you're saying. You're not talking about that.
No, I think that should be changed. I think it should be considered to be changed, especially if you have representation there. Well, now there's
What is that 25,000 again?
any capital improvement essentially needs to go back, and you see that on
And you see
consent
those
agenda.
job orders. Maybe, and I'm not here to make motions, obviously, I'm a staff person, but maybe the motion is, if you feel this way, is to put into the report back to the council that there be study or consideration into having one of the 5 members be made a council member and seeing what that would look like. We'll have to flesh out exactly the wording of what that looks like and how it would transition. But I'll leave that to the folks sitting over there.
Maybe ask the council if they wanted us to pursue that course and develop language. So it would be, the motion would be something like we move that, we recommended the council the 5-1 scenario. Which one did you want?
I wanted that originally, but then after listening to Hap and listening to Nick, I'm wondering if I'm changing my mind on that.
Well, and the other part is...
because I mean, when you hear other people's opinions, you think things through, and now I'm not sure that that's what I want to do. Now, I mean...
Well, they could retain their 5 people that they have in place now, too.
Yeah, they could.
Which would be more knowledge, more special.
So the 2 for 7, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you wanted to ask the council if they want to pursue a 2 to 7, two additional members, 7-year terms? I don't know if I want. I don't know if I want.
I think if we do that, I think it's very, very, very important that the whole council who will be deciding that hear both sides. They need to hear Hap's explanation that he just gave. They need to hear Nick's explanation that he just gave, because we need to make an educated decision on that.
Maybe it's a 2-part referral to the council. Part 1 you've already made through motion, which is going to modify the policy. Option 3, the money comes into the general operations for the council's decision. But the second part is report out that we did what you asked. Think about Adam Fisher brought this up. Was it Adam Fisher? No,
it was Adam.
anyway, the idea, here's the three options. You keep what we have today, you go to a 5 and 1, or you go to a 7 and 2. Here's the pros and cons, and let the body give direction. There's 7 members of the body that aren't even here.
Sure.
Which could be
Yeah.
that the body directs you to reconvene this meeting and explore this further, which was the whole purpose. I know you want to get out of it. So, and I want to make clear, you mentioned about when you hear people's opinions. I don't have an opinion. I don't get to have an
Oh,
opinion.
I'm sorry.
So one thing when we do this, if
I hear
so,
your opinions
and
all the time.
one way,
I don't want to be telling the truth.
one way that you do this,
Happy go,
is-
Bob, come on.
one way that you do this is you come with your recommendation in terms of the policy. You can report about this particular one, and when this is going to be on the agenda, I can circulate the information that I was talking about, because this is a fully discussed question out there in the law of how to deal with this.
Yeah.
Many municipalities deal with this question.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay.
So do you want to make a motion to send that piece for the
What he
discussion?
said.
Yeah.
Okay.
A motion for
Or
what
who's
you
making
said.
that motion? Are you?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Is there any more business?
Are you seconding that, Mike? I'm kind of half running things at this
Okay,
moment.
motion by her, second by you.
Okay.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Opposed?
thank you.
So carried. Okay, now, is there anything else is there any other drowned rat that we need to deal with? Okay, if not, motion to adjourn?
Yep.
Does the disbanding of it have to be done by this body, or is it done by the commission or council as a whole?
I think the council disbanded.
Correct. I mean, I think it can happen different ways, but I think you're poised for that being addressed when you have this discussion. So-
Right.
This body can't do any of these things by
And
itself.
frankly, any one of you, when you're in front of the council, when this discussion comes up, could move to consider the disbanding if you feel it's right to do.
Right, right.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Second by O'Reilly, all in favor, aye, opposed, nay. We stand adjourned. Thank you.